Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just wanted to say, feels like it's been a long time since I've seen everyone. I hope you're all safe and healthy at home. And I guess we need to get started here. And so before we left on the break, we were solving equations. So I thought the best way to start would be to go through a review of solving equations. So just as a reminder of what our objective is, our objective in solving an equation is to isolate the variable. That means we want to get the x or the y all by itself. So we're trying to get rid of numbers and brackets and anything else that's next to that variable. So just a quick run through of the rules that we have gone through so far. When you look at an equation, the first thing you want to do is to gather or add any like terms on the left side, and then you want to move and add any like terms on the right side. Of course, if you don't have any like terms, then you can skip that step. The second step would be to then move the variables to the left, and at this stage it's still going to work to flip the equation. Okay? The third step then is to look and see if there's any numbers that are either added or subtracted from the variable, and we're going to use opposites to get rid of that. So if there's an add 2, we would subtract 2. If there's a subtract 4, we would add 4. The next step is to remove any multiply or divide numbers, and again we're using opposite. So if there was a 2 multiplying the variable, we're going to divide by 2. If there's a -3 dividing the variable, then we're going to multiply by -3. Once we've done those 4 steps, it means we have solved the equation, and just like we did before the break, some of the equations I'm going to ask you to check. So quick run through on how to check. First step, rewrite the equation. Then take your answer and substitute it into the equation. You're going to calculate the left side, and then you're going to calculate the right side, and you need to compare. They should be equal if your answer was correct. All right, let's look through a few examples. And as you go through your worksheet, you can come back and look at the lesson and look at the examples and compare what's one that looks similar to the question you're asked to do on the assignment, and run through my my little tutorial here on how to solve that. Okay, let's look at question 1. Okay, in question 1, we've got a 2 multiplying the variable. Okay. The 2 is multiplying the x, so we're going to do the opposite. We're going to divide by 2. In order to keep an equation equal, if we divide by 2 on the left, we have to divide by 2 on the right. Remember, we're using that fraction line to show divide. Now, what that does is it takes that 2 and it divides it by 2, which would equal 1. And 1x is the same thing as x. We have isolated the x. On the other side, we have -6 divided by 2, so a negative divided by a positive is a negative, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. We have solved that equation. Okay? Let's move on to the second example. Now, in our second example, we have x being divided by -2, so we're going to do the opposite of a divide. We're going to multiply. I want to remind you we're not using that x traditional symbol for showing multiply because it does look like a variable. We're going to use a bracket. So we're going to take the x and we're going to multiply it by exactly the same number, sign and everything. So -2 is what we're going to multiply by. Remember, if you multiply the left by -2, you have to multiply the right by -2. Again, just like in the first example, we're going to have a number divided by itself. -2 divides by -2 to give you 1, and 1x is the same thing as x. We have isolated the variable. Calculating the other side, a negative times a negative equals a positive, and 2 times 3 equals 6. Solved again, the second example. Okay, moving on to the third example. We're looking at the x and we're saying what's happening to it. It has a 5 subtracted from it, so we're going to add 5. When we subtract 5 and add 5, those opposites give us a 0. So that means now x is subtracting 0, which means it is just x. We need to do the same thing to the other side, add 5 to keep it equal, and 4 plus 5 equals 9. We've solved that in a single step. Okay, moving on to the fourth example. X has an add 4 next to it. We need to get rid of the add 4 by doing the opposite, which is subtract 4. Oops. If we subtract 4 from the left, we have to subtract 4 from the right. And adding 4 and subtracting 4 becomes a 0. X plus 0 is the same thing as x. And now on the other side, remember when we're adding integers together, we need to think temperature. So a negative is cold, added to another negative, which is cold, means it's going to get colder. So this is going to give us -5. Solved. All right. Equation 5. Now, on this one, we can see we have two things that are next to the x. We need to get rid of the 2 that's multiplying it. We need to get rid of the plus 4. If we go back through our steps, remember that the add and subtract here has to be done before the multiply and divide. So we're going to get rid of the add 4 first. Just like we did in those single one-step equations, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. That gets rid of the add 4. Now we bring down what's left. 2x is on the left side, and that's going to equal 16 minus 4, which gives us 12 on the right. Now we need to get rid of the multiply by 2, so we're going to do the opposite, which is divide by 2 on the left and the right. And 2 divides by 2 to give us the 1x all by itself. And then 12 divided by 2 gives us 6. We've solved that in 2 steps. All right, let's look at the example 6 here. Now, if we go back to our steps, we know we need to get x all by itself. We've got a -3 multiplying it. We've got a 1 minusing from it. But the x is not on the left side, so we're going to simply flip this equation. So what was on the right goes to the left, -3x minus 1. Don't flip what's on the side, just slide it over and make it on the opposite side. And again, we're going to slide the -16 over to the right. Now, we need to get rid of the add number or subtract number. So this is a subtract 1, so we are going to add 1 to both sides. That gives us a 0 there. Bring down what's left, -3x is equal to, again, we've got adding happening here and we want to use temperature. So cold 16, hot 1, it's going to warm up the 16 to make it -15. All right. The next step is to get rid of the multiply, so we're going to divide. Remember to divide by exactly the same number. It is -3 timesing, so we're going to do -3 dividing. We need to do it on the right side as well, -3 divided. So a negative divided by a negative gives us a positive 1x, which is the same thing as x. And a negative divided by a negative, again, is a positive, and 15 divided by 3 is 5. Solved. Okay, moving on to question 7. We've got a divide by 3 and we've got an add 2. Remember, according to the rules, we need to get rid of the add first. So we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. That gives us a 0 on the add. So what's left is x divided by 3 is equal to, again, think temperature. +8 and -2, hot with some cold. It's going to cool down the 8 till we get +6. Next step is to get rid of the divide. We're going to use a bracket to show multiply. And we're going to multiply by exactly the same number that's dividing. Remember that the 3 divides by 3 to give you 1x. Got our x all by itself. And 6 times 3 gives us 18. We've solved. The next one's a little bit trickier. Okay, we've got to multiply, we've got to divide, and we've got to subtract. Just like according to the steps, we need to get rid of the multiply, the add or subtract first before the multiply or divide. So this is a minus 6. We're going to get rid of it by adding 6. We're going to add 6 to the right. That becomes a 0, and we've got 2x divided by 3 equals, and 18 plus 6 gives us 24. Okay, now, oops, that doesn't look like a 3. Now we need to get rid of the multiply and divide. I taught you before that it's easiest to get rid of the divide first, because then we know we're not going to get any decimals. And so to get rid of the divide by 3, we're going to multiply by 3. Do the same thing on the right, multiply by 3. 3 divides by 3 to give you 1. 1 times 2x just simply gives us 2x. And 24 times 3. Well, it's a big number. If you don't have a calculator, you can just break it into steps here. 3 times 20 is 60, right? 20, 40, 60. And 3 times 4 is 12. Add them together and you get 72. So 2x is equal to 72. Now, remember, we need to get rid of the multiply by 2, so we're going to divide by 2. 2 divides by 2 to give you 1. And x is equal to 72 divided by 2. Again, if you want to break this up, you can go 70 divided by 2 gives you 35. And 2 divided by 2 gives you 1. So 35 and 1 gives us 36. So x equals 36. Solved. Okay. Question 9. We've got a 5 that is positive, and we are then subtracting x, which is then being divided by 2. So we have a positive 5 to get rid of. Students kind of panic here and they think that the subtract sign belongs to the 5. It doesn't. What is in front of that 5 is that invisible positive. So that means we need to subtract 5. So do that to both sides. Add 5 and subtract 5 becomes a 0. Now this is the tricky part. We've got a negative sign in front of the x. So we've got negative, and then x divided by 2 is equal to, and on the right, cold, and more cold gives us colder, so that's going to be negative 8. Now there's 2 ways we could do this. We could just, the way it looks right now, it's being divided by 2, so we can do the opposite, which is to multiply by 2. And we would do that on the right-hand side as well, multiply by 2. 2 divides by 2 to give you 1. Now, the tricky part is we have negative 1x. Can't ignore that negative sign. And then on the right, we've got negative times a positive is a negative. 8 times 2 is 16. Now, this isn't the solution yet, because we need x all by itself. We can't have the negative sign in front of it, or we can't have a negative 1 in front of it. So just like if that was a negative 2, we would divide by the opposite, which is the opposite, using the exact same number. So we're going to divide by negative 1 on both sides, and that cancels, and we end up with x is equal to a negative divided by a negative gives us a positive, and 16 divided by 1 is 16. All right. Now, the other way you could have solved that is, in fact, you could have, multiplied by negative 2. And that would have gotten the negative and the negative canceling each other out, and you would have got right to the solution a little bit quicker. All right. Question 10. if we go back up to our steps, our first step is to gather or add like terms on the left side and then also the right side. So on our left side, you should see that there's an X group with another X group that can be put together. So remember temperature when we're adding. +2, and the sign in front belongs with the term, so that's -3. So hot and cold, we got more colds, we're going to end up with -1x. That gives us then +4 is equal to 19. So we've simplified this by adding like terms. The next, we know we need to get rid of any add or subtract. So that's an add 4, so we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. We're left with -1x is equal to, again, hot 19, cold 4. That means it's going to cool down the 19, and we're going to end up with 15. And now the last step is to get rid of the -1 by dividing by -1. Whoops. And -1 divides by -1 to give you x all by itself. Positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 15 divided by 1 is 15. Okay, our last example. Again, gather like terms or add like terms on the left and also on the right. So looking at the left side, we've got an X group and another X group. So -3 and positive, this has got the invisible 1. So cold with hot is going to warm this up to -2x. Copy what's left on the left-hand side, which is -5 or -5. On the right-hand side, we also have like terms. So 19 plus 4 gives us 23. Now we've got a simple two-step equation. So get rid of the add or subtract first. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. And that means that what's left is -2x is equal to 23 plus 5 hot, and more hot gives us hotter, so that's 28. Now, dividing to get rid of the multiply, so we're going to divide by exactly the same number, which is -2, and divide this side by -2. -2 divided by -2 gives us our 1x. Then 28 divided by 2 is 14. And don't forget the sign, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Okay, we've solved. Now what I haven't done is do any checks. Okay, so we're going to go back up here and we're going to do a couple of checks on the even questions. Okay, so to do a check, remember, we start with the original equation. This first one was x divided by -2 is equal to -3. That's our first step. Just write out the equation. The second step is to substitute your answer in. So +6 is our answer. It's going to go in where the x is. So we're going to have +6, use a bracket to show substitution. And then that's divided by -2. The third step here is to calculate. So a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. We've got -3 on the left. Bring down our right. We have -3 on the right. Left equals right. So this indeed is the correct answer. Okay, let's try another one here. Example 4. We're going to write out the original equation. X plus 4 is equal to -1. We're going to take out the x and we're going to substitute our answer in using a bracket. So x is going to become -5. Now we're going to calculate the left side. So remember, temperature when you're adding 5 cold and 4 hot gives us more cold than hot, so that's going to be a cold answer, -1. Compare it to the right, which is -1. Whoops. And And -1 is equal to -1, which means our answer was correct. Okay. We'll do maybe a more complicated one. I'll go down to example 10 here. Okay, again, start with the original equation. 2x plus 4 is equal to, 2x plus 4 minus 3x is equal to 19. That's our first step. Our second step is to substitute in. So we're going to have to put our answer in two places because we've got two x's. So 2 bracket, our answer was -15, so we're going to put -15 in there, plus 4 is equal to, I don't know why I keep doing that, minus 3 bracket -15. Now, our next step is to calculate. So remember, you're following BEDMAS. So we're going to multiply first. 2 times 15 is 30. But a positive times a negative is a -30. And we're going to do the next multiply. Use the sign in front for the connector. So a negative times a negative gives us a positive. And 3 times 15 is 45. Don't forget there's an add 4 in there. Now we need to keep calculating, and we're just going to move from into adding from left to right. So -30 plus 4, negative is cold, and adding 4 is hot, so it's going to warm that up to -26. And then we've still got an add 45 here. So 26 cold and 45 hot. It's going to warm up the 45. When we subtract those numbers, we end up with 19. And comparing that to the right side, 19 on the left equals our 19 on the right. And we know it's correct. Okay, I've also attached an assignment. And it's just, the assignment is just solving equations review. Work your way through the questions. I've added answers to the bottom of the page. And so be checking your answers as you go. Remember to be showing all of your steps because when you get tested on this, there's going to be marks for each step, okay? If you're struggling with a question, go back and try and find one similar to it on the lesson that I've just done, and you can replay the recording. All right, good luck. Email me if you have any questions, and I can help you out. Okay, good luck. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.